Welcome! Thank you for joining me. I'm Mr. Rodman, taking you through oligopolies and game theory as we look at Chapter 15. So why do oligopolists have an incentive to act in ways that reduce their combined profit? When do they collude? When do they decide all of these things? We use what's called game theory in order to take a look at that. What happens when they engage in what we call tacit collusion? And then we look at antitrust policy in order to keep oligopolies from having too much market power. So we'll take a look at those in this chapter. There are a number of additional resources for you to take a look at in the chapter notes. I've included 6 here that I think are helpful on oligopolies, on game theory, some from Mr. Clifford, from Khan Academy, from Microeconomics and Refonomics. Some resources I think you'll find helpful, so do check those out. So let's look at oligopoly and game theory as we look at 4.5 on the College Board's exam description of the microeconomics course. And in this chapter, we're looking at oligopoly and the imperfect competition within oligopoly. Well, the idea of an oligopoly is that you have a very small number of producers, of businesses that are part of that organization. So usually less than 10. The idea is a small group of individuals that are kind of controlling the market. They have market power here. Their products can be differentiated or can be identical. Doesn't matter. But the idea is they have market power. And they're not the only one, or they'd be a monopoly, a pure monopoly. But there are a small number of organizations, of businesses or corporations that have this. There are significant barriers to enter this market, a lot of it because of the market power that these institutions hold. And they're price makers, not price takers. So they hold significant market power here, and they can use that to their advantage. And they don't have to necessarily use it in collusion with each other in order to drive up or down prices. So we'll see there is a lot of mutual interdependence. But they're going to use some non-price competition in order to do that as well. And we're going to see how that shakes out in this chapter. It's important to note, with this interdependence comes some strategic pricing. I mentioned the non-price competition that is used here. And some examples of this, OPEC is probably the most famous oligopoly. The idea of a cartel is an oligopoly. And this is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. And that is, they're exporting oil and basically selling it to other countries around the world that need oil in order to create gas and refine it into gas and other oil products in order to fuel their vehicles. And that's significant for OPEC. And so as a result, they have significant market power because of the fact that there's only a few of them, and they're all colluding in order to cut production or expand production in order to drive up or down prices in terms of what we see here. We only have a handful of cereal companies. There's usually, I think, 4 out there that are in this realm. Now, we've seen car producers used in the example of monopolistic competition. We can also see them in oligopoly. Now, that is changing in the market, and I would say, the textbook looks at that and says car producers are more monopolistically competitive, or excuse me, they say they're more oligopoly oriented. But we've seen a lot more monopolistic competition of them of late. You see a lot of players in the electric vehicle space, in some of the new technologies that are coming out there. So I think that is changing in terms of barriers to entry. We still see that, but there are some aspects of that are monopolistically competitive, and we've seen some changes there. But again, in the old days, we had very few players in that space. That is changing, but I would still say they're somewhere in between. You can make the case for both, really, in terms of them being both oligopolistic and monopolistically competitive. The cereal space, as I mentioned, there's only about 4 that are out there. We see Kellogg's, we see Post, we see General Mills, and you've got some of these. One is owned by Pepsi, and the other 3 owned by cereal makers or consumer goods producers that we see here. So they make a lot of different products, very monopolistically competitive in terms of the differentiation. But there's only so many of them, so they really can drive the market power that they play here. We also see this in batteries. The idea of Energizer, Duracell, and Rayovac. Now, Amazon's kind of jumping into this space. Again, they have the idea of economies of scale to be able to do this and compete at that level. But you don't see a lot of others really in that space that are able to play at that same level as Duracell and Energizer and Rayovac are doing. We also see this in the light bulb space. GE and Westinghouse really dominating the market in terms of light bulb producers. There may be others that jump into the space. Again, economies of scale, barriers to entry, but are they able to do it with the size, depth, and breadth of the big guys? Not really. So they're minor players, not big ones. And again, making this very oligopoly oriented in terms of what we see here. So how do these markets that we've looked at, how do they become oligopolies? This is when we have a market power in some way, shape, or form, and they're able to control that industry because there's only a few of them. So with the light bulb space, for instance, you've got two major players, GE and Westinghouse, and they're able to control the market and control production, and that production drives up or down prices as a result of that. So we see them being able to control that industry. They are price makers as a result of what they're producing. Again, high barrier to entry in terms of what we see here. That is significant because, again, to compete with a GE or a Westinghouse on the economies of scale, really hard to do, and to do it in a way that is cost effective for you to be able to sell that product and actually make money off of it. That's really hard to do in this space. The car industry is another. Now we're seeing that is changing in terms of the Teslas of the world. Apple's jumping into the bandwagon. We've got a number of firms outside of the United States, China, for instance, that's jumping into the electric vehicle space. And so economies of scale isn't as big a hurdle as it used to be. And where we see the brands are more monopolistically competitive in terms of what we see there. But again, the startup costs are large. So it's really hard. And again, going back to economies of scale, really hard to get up and running and produce a product that is cost effectively able to be sold in a way that can compete with the big guys. That's really hard to do. And one of the reasons it's hard to do is because like Carnegie or like Rockefeller, they own the industry. From top to bottom, they own the raw materials, they own the resources, the production lines, they own the distribution channels, the supply chains, and all the way to the getting it on the shelf. So they own all pieces of that market. That was really key for the Rockefellers and the Carnegies to be able to be successful. And we see the same thing is true of oligopolies in the significant markets and market power that they have there. Okay, so let's look for a moment at this idea of colluding oligopolies, this idea of them working together in order to drive prices up or down. Now, collusion is illegal in the United States. Let me just start off by saying that. But there are other ways that they can collude, or what we call tacit collusion without colluding, this idea of non-cooperative behavior, and in just looking at the market in terms of being able to make an impact on that. So a cartel would be very much a colluding oligopoly. OPEC is a great example of a colluding oligopoly. A small number of countries that are able to adjust production. They talk quite openly about the production that they're either going to drive up or down, and that's going to shift production and prices as a result of that. So them agreeing to that is really what creates the collusion and the cartel that we see here in terms of that collusion. They're going to set those prices and outputs. They're going to agree to those levels. They're going to stick with those levels in order to keep everybody in the cartel happy. You obviously don't want to upset the other members. Then they'll go back and doing something. We'll call that the tit for tat strategy. We'll talk about in a minute. But the idea here is you need a pretty identical product. I mean, oil, pretty commodity driven. It's a commodity, which is same identical product being sold. Wouldn't know whose it is, being sold on the open market. So that's very easy to collude in that environment in a cartel because of the fact that your products are similar. And also you have to have a way to punish the bad guys, the ones that break the collusion and go off and do their own thing. And sometimes there are ways to do that in terms of driving up or down production of all of the other members to get even with the people that have cheated, that have not gone with what everybody else has agreed to. So they are acting like a monopoly because they have the market power, because they essentially are driving the market and creating the prices based on the quantity that they're producing. So there's no new graphs here. Spoiler alert, the graph it's a monopoly graph. So when you think of an oligopoly, think of it like a monopoly in terms of what you're seeing here, because it is the downward sloping demand curve, marginal revenue falling beneath it, and you're pricing this above where you would normally produce at MC equals MR. That price is the quantity is determined at MC equals MR, drive it up to the demand curve, that becomes the price you're selling it at, which is much higher than either MC equals D, the idea of what you're producing allocatively efficient, or at minimum ATC, which would be here, in terms of the productive efficiency. So they're neither productive nor allocatively efficient. They are definitely a monopoly, and they have that market power. So there's another type of oligopoly called a duopoly, which is also more of what we see in the Westinghouse GE version of the light bulbs, and that is two firms that are competing in this space. Now, the important thing to note here with the duopoly is that obviously there's only two firms, and those firms are driving the market in terms of output, in terms of what they're able to produce here. And the idea is that they control the market, and so they're acting like a monopoly, but with just two firms. So it is like an oligopoly, like a monopoly. They have the market power, and how much they produce, especially if they, in this country, they can't collude. So GE is looking at what Westinghouse is producing, and the same, Westinghouse is looking at what GE is producing in order to drive up and down production, which affects prices. And can drive the prices up and down. And we're going to spend a lot of time looking at this, because how much they produce and how much they the quantity that they're producing at, which is driving the prices, is really the crux of this chapter. It really is the bulk of what we're going to see in this chapter, which is that idea of game theory. How do they determine what the price is that they're going to produce at in order to make money? And you can take college courses just on game theory in college. A really great and interesting situation in terms of behavior of companies and how they price their market in order to maximize revenue. And again, firms respond to incentives, right? The profit motive is important here. And game theory is kind of how they play that out, looking at what the other one is producing, where they are dominant in that space in terms of production, and what impact it has on their own business. And that's the idea of game theory in terms of what's behind it. They're trying to maximize profits by looking at, and especially in spaces where they can't collude on prices, they're looking at how can I adjust what I'm producing and what I'm charging in order to maximize my profits without colluding with the other guys, okay? Because to do that in this country, as I said, is illegal. Cartels are illegal in the United States. But the idea here is they can do it without colluding. They can do it without working together, just by looking at this idea of game theory. Now, many of you have probably seen the movie A Beautiful Mind. The character, the idea of John Nash in the movie, and basically a brilliant man who comes up with the idea of game theory in terms of what we see. This idea of different behaviors of different firms really is highlighted in the movie, and there's a number of aspects that we look at here, but we're going to spend a lot of time on this idea of game theory and what we call the Nash equilibrium. So why do we learn about this? Why does this matter in microeconomics? Well, the important thing here is that you got to understand that oligopolies are interdependent. Okay, they're taking actions and doing things in terms of production and pricing based on what the other firms are doing. And so they're constantly watching and monitoring what the other firms are doing, because again, you want to make sure you're maximizing your profit. If you're not paying attention to what the other guys are doing, you're selling your product too cheaply and you're not producing enough. And so those two things are going to be hurting your profit margin, and shortly thereafter, I'm sure the other company will be driving you out of business and exercising their significant market power because they're paying attention to what you're doing, for sure. But this is the idea of that interdependence. You're interdependent on that pricing and quantity of output in order to be strategic, in order to make sure you're maximizing your revenue. And that really is the driver here. So game theory is the best way to make that happen. And I would also add here, per College Board looking at the FRQs and questions on the multiple choice, when it comes to oligopolies, game theory is one that we usually almost always see an FRQ related to it. A short form FRQ is usually game theory. So there's a number of game theory FRQs that are out there, free response questions on game theory that you're going to see, and we're going to do a lot of them here in the next week, and you'll see them time and again on the quiz, on the test, on the cumulative test, on the AP exam, in terms of what's driving that here. So game theory is going to help us because we know humans act in a way that is driven by the profit motive, the incentives. We respond to incentives, right? And so it's really important that we're able to, based on that, make some predictions about human behavior. A great example of this, and I encourage you to take a closer look at this, we will in class, this idea of the ice cream simulation. It's always interesting. Usually in class, I have you team up with somebody else and we look at this idea of two people that are selling ice cream on the beach. Where do they go? If their prices are identical and they're selling the same product, how do they decide where they're going to place themselves in terms of trying to maximize revenue? And obviously the beachgoers are looking for somebody who's close to them, where their towels are, where they've kind of set up their blankets and are laying out on the beach, and they're going to go to the closest guy and they're going to buy, because they know that what's really the difference? You're both going to have prices that are outrageous, and you're selling the same product, so why not just go to the closest one and be done with it? Get back to the blanket and on with my vacation, right? So with people distributed all across the beach, the idea here is what location are you going to pick? Where is going to be the best spot for you in terms of how you're going to maximize your revenue? And so what we see here in this video playing out is this game that is being played about these two characters that are trying to figure out the best location and where they should put their firm, essentially ice cream A and ice cream B. And what we see is they're going to make decisions based on where the other one chooses. So once A goes somewhere, B is going to strategically place themselves in a capacity somewhere on the beach that is going to help them to maximize their revenue. And they're going to continue to move and do that round after round until they get to a point where they are both trying to maximize their revenue. And that's ultimately what businesses do every day in terms of this pricing structure in oligopoly. So at the end of the day, what are they looking at? How are they making decisions for the next day based on this? When they bring their ice cream cart out again, they're looking at this in terms of making decisions that will help them. And again, I encourage you to watch the video here. We don't have time to do this in this overview video, but it really is a good way of outlining this idea of strategic advantage and looking at oligopolies in terms of two firms that are making decisions based on the other firm. And that really is the game theory we're talking about here. Another example of this is what we call the prisoner's dilemma. You're charged with a crime along with a buddy that they've arrested also. They put you in two separate holding rooms and they're trying to get you to confess. You know that if you do this, if you confess, the idea here is you're going to spend more time in jail. But if you both deny it, you're going to spend less time in jail. If you confess but the other denies, then they're going to be put away and you're going to go free. But what are the odds that the other person's not going to squeal just like you? And so this is what we call the prisoner's dilemma. And the idea here is, again, if they both deny, they both get 5 years in jail. If they both confess, they both get 10. That's a big difference, 5 years versus 10. But hey, if you confess and the other one denies, then the idea is you go free and the other one gets 20 years. However, if you deny and they confess, you get 20 years. So the stakes are very high, and you don't know what the other person is doing in the other room, and this becomes the prisoner's dilemma. How do you know what decision to make here in terms of what to say or what to do? Because you could be facing 20 years if you deny, but the other person confesses. And they're going to tell you all kinds of things, right? They're going to say, oh, the other one's squealing like a little pig, right? And you don't know that they have, but you're concerned that if you confess and they confess, you end up in jail for 10 years. And that's the idea of the prisoner's dilemma. Now we look at this, firms look at this in terms of profitability. This example is Ajinomoto and ADM are producing their product, and they're looking at it in terms of what they can produce. I like this visual model because the triangles really tell you which end to be looking at in terms of the impact, and that's why I use the color-coded model here of the triangles. You'll notice they're color-coded with ADM being more the orangish yellow and Ajinomoto being the purple The way we look at this is, and we can start right here with ADM, if they're going to produce 30 million pounds, is Ajinomoto going to be better to make $180 million in profit by producing 30 million pounds, or $200 million in profit by producing 40 pounds? And the answer is they're better off producing 40 million and making $200 million, because this, between the two, if ADM is producing along this line, and these are the two choices they have, it's better for them to make $200 million and produce 40 million pounds. They're going to make more money there. Now, if ADM produces 40 million pounds, is it better for Ajinomoto to produce 30 million pounds and make $150 million, or to produce 40 million pounds and make $160 million? And I think we know the answer to that. It's better for them to produce 40 million pounds. So this becomes what we call their dominant strategy. Dominant strategy means there's no incentive for them to produce 30 million pounds, because in both scenarios, they're going to produce 40 million pounds and make more money. Neither scenario is going to be more profitable at 30 million pounds of production. So Ajinomoto has a dominant strategy to produce 40 million pounds. Okay, now let's look at ADM. If Ajinomoto is producing 30 million pounds, is it better for ADM to produce 30 million and make 180 million, or to produce 40 million pounds and make 200 million in terms of what we see down here? And the answer is it's better for them to make 200 million. Now, if we look over at Ajinomoto producing 40 million pounds, is it better for ADM to produce 30 million pounds and make 150 million that we see here in this column? Is it better for them to make 150 million, or is it better for them to produce 40 million pounds and make 160 million, which is what we see down here? And the answer is it's better for them to, again, produce 40 million pounds. So this is their dominant strategy, to produce 40 million pounds. Now you notice both firms have a dominant strategy, an incentive, a motivation to produce 40 million pounds. And so what we end up with is this box in the lower right-hand corner that becomes what we call a Nash equilibrium. The idea is that the incentive to move from that box for Ajinomoto is to lose money, for ADM is to lose money. And so the idea here is if we produce 40 million pounds and we're going to make more money here, then it's better for us to not move out of this space, because to do so, we're going to lose money as a result of that. Okay. Now, the common refrain I always hear is, well, Ajinomoto made $160 million here, but they could have made 200 here. But you can't look at it that way, because that's not the way you're supposed to be looking at Ajinomoto. You're looking at the company across the top. You're looking at the rows. You're looking across horizontally. Okay. ADM is what you're looking at vertically. So don't look at this and say, oh, well, they're Nash equilibrium. It would be incentive for them to move up. Well, they can't move up. Ajinomoto, because they're at the top, can only move crosswise. They can only move horizontally. And ADM can only move vertically. Okay, so that's why this lower right-hand corner is really their Nash equilibrium. Their dominant strategy is here, and in order to move from that box, they would lose money. If ADM were to move out of that box, they'd lose $10 million. They'd go from 160 to 150. And if Ajinomoto moved from that box, they would also lose $10 million, going from 160 to 150. So there's no incentive for them to leave this box. This becomes their Nash equilibrium. Their dominant strategy, based on the other firm, is that they're going to make more money if they stay there. So both firms are going to produce 40 million pounds, and they're both going to make more money. Now notice, they didn't collude. They didn't agree to this. They didn't talk it out. They didn't talk about what each others are going to do or what they're going to price it. They saw, based on what the other one was doing, I can do this and make more money. And that's the idea of game theory. That's what we see here in terms of that game theory, in terms in order to maximize their profit. Okay. Now this is the prisoner's dilemma I talked about before. And again, another scenario, I used in this case, used the example from the book because I liked the color coding. Again, Thelma is on the vertical axis here. We have Louise on the horizontal. And you can see if they don't confess, they only get 5 years. If they confess, they get 15 years. And if they confess but the other one doesn't, then the idea is they'll get 2 years, the other one gets 20. But again, how do you know that's the prisoner's? How do you know what the other one's going to say? And if the other one's going to give you up, you don't. And that's the prisoner's dilemma. that we see there. Again, we have another strategy that we look at here that's called tit for tat. And that's the idea that after you start playing in one scenario, what you start to see is, hey, I can move and produce something else and make more money there. And then that's going to prompt an action by the other firm to also do the same. So what you will see is if you don't have a dominant strategy and they're kind of moving back and forth in terms of what they should produce and how much money they're making, what you're going to find is the idea that they're getting to is when we engage in tit for tat strategy, the idea is each firm is going to make $180 million if they end up in this space. Excuse me, but if they move out of that space, they're going to make more money for the first year, but eventually they're going to make less money than they made in the tit for tat box, okay? Because notice they're going to make $160 million the second year, okay? And so, and the idea there is you kind of go back and forth in terms of profit and loss. You make more money one year, but you make less the next year, and hopefully it evens out in the end. But what you end up with is you end up getting into a space where you ultimately always cheat. And the idea is you go back and forth on this. You're going to end up in a space where you're always cheating. You're going to end up losing more money, and you're going to end up back at the tit for tat strategy, because that's going to be your long-term scenario to make more money. Because if you both always cheat and you end up cheating over and over again, you're going to make less money than you did when you were in the tit for tat strategy. So that's going to lead you back to that space without ever colluding, without ever talking to the other firm. And that's what we see there. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this in class and look at some practice sessions. And we're going to do a couple here in terms of trying to address this. So we have two firms that are competing in this space. And what we see here is we have highs and lows in terms of what they're pricing. And notice here that in the high box, again, I'm going to color code this in a moment. But what you're seeing here is both are high and they're making $20 each, okay? Versus this firm one is going to charge high, they've color coded it here, is going to make no money at the high, but the firm two is going to make $30 going low, okay? And so what I like to do in this scenario is to really break it down in terms of, so it's a little easier to take a look at. And this is a part of an activity we normally do in class where you work with a partner and basically decide how much are you gonna price high or price low, how much money are you gonna make. Obviously, the idea here is what we want to get to is these firms that are looking at in terms of how much they're going to price. And so that's when I say, color code it or draw a horizontal or a diagonal line through the space in order to better see what's going on here. So notice if firm one charges a high price, and firm two can either charge a high price and make $20, or they can charge a low price and make $30. So it's going to be better for them to charge a lower price here. Now, if firm two firm one is charging a lower price, is it better for firm two to go high and make $0 or go low and make $10? Well, we know it's better to make $10. So in this space, again, firm two has a dominant strategy of going low. There's no incentive anywhere in this model for firm two to charge higher prices because they're going to lose money in both scenarios. So whether firm one goes high or low, firm two needs to always price low to make more money. And so that's what we call their dominant strategy. Now let's look at firm one and see what their options are. So if firm two goes high, is it better for firm one to go high and make $20 or low and make $30? Well, the answer is it's better for them to make $30. But if we look at the scenario where firm two goes low, as we know is their dominant strategy, is it better for firm one to go high and make $0 or low and make $10? Well, it's obviously better for them to, again, go low and make $10. So that tells us firm one also has a dominant strategy of going low. And so what we find is in terms of doing this, we find that the Nash equilibrium, and again, comes down to this lower right-hand corner box where both firms are charging low prices and making more money as a result of this. Because again, if they were to move out of this space, they would make less money. And that's what we see in terms of what we're seeing here. So firm one would make $0. Again, firm two would make $0. So it's better for them to stay in this space and make money as a result of it. And that's what we see in there. So dominant strategy, the best move to make depending on, regardless of what your opponent does. So now what you will get to is a scenario in which there's not always a dominant strategy. Not every firm has a dominant strategy. So what you'll have to do is, if you don't have a dominant strategy, you will have to base your decision on what the other firm does. And if the other firm goes low, then you want to price that accordingly to how much money you'd make if that firm went low. And that becomes your Nash equilibrium in terms of space you don't want to get out of in order to make more money that way. So looking at this scenario, let's see what the firm's dominant strategy is. And again, if you need to pause the video here to take a look at it, we've color-coded it to help. But the idea here is firm 1 and 2 are determining, do we price high, do we price low, how much money do we make as a result of it in terms of what we see here. And I've kind of done this for you in the color coding. So pause here if you need to, and then we'll pick it up and look at the answers. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that. Notice if firm 1 goes high, firm 2 is going to have a better shot at going low and earning more money, $90 versus $50. But notice firm 2 doesn't have a dominant strategy here, because if firm 1 goes low, they'd be better to charge higher rates and actually make $40. So firm 2 does not have a dominant strategy. But firm 1, in looking at what firm 2 does, if firm 2 goes high, is it better for firm 1 to go high and make $100 or low and make $50? I think we know it's $100. And they have a dominant strategy of also, when they go low, 60 versus 20, they have a dominant strategy of going high price. So firm 1 is always going to have a high price because they're going to make more money in both scenarios. So what does firm 2 do if they don't have a dominant strategy in this case? Well, they're going to know that firm 1 is pricing higher. So they're going to price lower because they know that it's better to make $90 than $50. And that's what we see in this scenario. Okay, the dominant strategy then is to go high because firm 2 doesn't have one. What do we see here? We see the $100 is better than $50, and $60 is better than $20. So again, firm 1 has the dominant strategy of always going high. Firm 2 doesn't have the dominant strategy because, again, as we see here, that they are split in terms of whether to go low or go high and make more money. And as a result of that, that is the impact that we see here. So the Nash equilibrium, well, if the firm, if the firm is going high for firm 1 and low for firm 2, firm 1 is always going to go high. Firm 2 is going to decide to go low as a result of this scenario, and they're always going to be in this space right here. So firm 1 high, firm 2 low. There's no incentive for them to leave that space. To do so, firm 1 would be going low. They'd lose money. They'd lose $40. Firm 2 would also lose $40. So there's no incentive for them to leave that space. That becomes the Nash equilibrium. When both firms are making decisions and have no incentive to leave that box, they're going to lose money if they leave that box. That's the Nash equilibrium. The question that always comes up is, do I have to have a dominant strategy in order to have a Nash equilibrium? No, as you can see here, firm 2 does not have a dominant strategy, and yet the Nash equilibrium is for firm 2 to go low and firm 1 to go high. Because again, Nash equilibrium is about the idea of incentive. Is there an incentive for them to leave that box? There is no incentive for firm 1 or firm 2 to leave that box that we see here. So no incentive for them to leave. Okay, there are a lot of other practice questions that are in here, and I would encourage you to check them out and do them. Activity 3-17 is also one in which you can take a look at. Okay, so what did we learn? Well, we learned that oligopolies are pricing strategically. Okay, they are worried about the competition that is in there. There's not a lot of it, but they do have market power. But they are worried about the other firm because they want to make sure that they maximize their profitability in order to be successful. They know that while they have a tendency to collude, we know that it is illegal to be able to collude, but they can do it in other ways by using game theory in order to make that happen. So we know that collusion in terms of colluding, and in terms of working together to drive up quantity or price, drive down quantity and up prices like a monopoly would, they're not able to do that. They can't collude in terms of driving up those prices because we know that's illegal in our country. But there are incentives for them to cheat. There are incentives for them to use game theory in order to maximize their pricing structures. And that's what we see here. So in terms of oligopoly graphs, as I mentioned, there aren't any. So this is very simple. Because of that interdependence, we have price leadership, which isn't necessarily a graph. I'm going to talk about that one in a second. We have the colluding oligopoly, which is essentially a monopoly. Think of it like two firms that are on a monopoly graph together. So it is the same there. And then we have what's called a non-colluding oligopoly. And this is where we get into what we call the kinked demand curve, where there's kind of a gap between the demand that we see here, and that we are going to skip. That is not College Board tested. It is not a concept you need to know. And so for purposes of simplification and time, we're going to fast forward through that part. So that's essentially what we're looking at here. So think of it in terms of price leadership and the idea of a monopoly, a really colluding oligopoly, looking at game theory in order to maximize their profitability. So let's talk about price leadership here for a second. So we know we have oligopoly. We have a number of firms in a small town. Okay, this example is gas stations. And notice, in order to maximize their profit, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to keep an eye on what other firms are doing, right? And OPEC does this all the time. They're looking at their production. They're looking at what other countries are producing, especially those within OPEC and those outside of OPEC, in order to determine what their production should be in order to drive up prices, in order to maximize profitability for them. So price leadership, it's important to note, again, as we've talked about time and again, collusion is illegal. And firms can't set prices on their own, but they can use price leadership as this concept to coordinate their prices. Okay, the idea of not colluding, but using game theory, the idea of pricing high or pricing low, or using that pricing strategy in order to move forward with maximizing profitability in this process. So what does that include? Well, the dominant firm looks to initiate a change in the price. They're going to change in that tit-for-tat strategy we looked at, the idea of going high or going low, or making a decision about production. And other firms are going to follow. They're going to follow as a result of that leadership on pricing. And what we're going to see here is they're all going to jump on the bandwagon because, again, they want to make sure that, hey, if somebody else is making money pricing higher or cutting production, we want to be able to do the same. So that is really the driver here. But there are some breakdowns, okay? This leads to price wars. Sometimes it isn't always successful in terms of the price increases of a firm. They're not going to be successful because people are going to other products that are cheaper, that are being sold. And if it's identical product, what's the advantage in going to you in terms of that? So other firms are going to try and eat each other's lunch, right? I mean, we see this all the time. They're undercutting each other. And we see this with a lot of employee pricing. We want to make sure that people who are working for our company don't go outside the company, that they're actually buying within. So we cut prices for employees. We give them the employee discount and that sort of thing in order to be able to keep them and keep them within the family, and that keeps the profits within the family. Okay, so again, think of this like the idea of a monopoly, a small number of firms that are basically producing and in a cartel, they're fixing these prices, as I said. But again, collusion is illegal in the United States, so we don't see this option. What we see is them acting more like a monopoly in terms of adjusting their production to drive up those prices. And if you remember from the monopoly graph, by cutting production, the price is going up because M equals MR is at a different place if you're producing a smaller quantity. In terms of what's being produced there, you're going to be moving, if you will, the marginal costs in terms of that production. So by doing that, you're driving up the price. Well, same is true if you produced more in order to drive other people out of business, I guess. I don't know why you would want to do that in terms of driving prices down, because you're hurting your company as well. But this is the idea behind a colluding oligopoly. And they don't have to necessarily be colluding on prices in order to impact profits by adjusting prices through the quantity that they're producing. And so we see this time and again. Pricing high, pricing low, cutting production, increasing production, all of these things they can do individually. And again, that price leadership can have an impact to there, but again, it's not a perfect solution. And we see a lot of firms in duopoly that are using game theory in order to make that happen. Those two firms that are in the industry, like in the light bulb scenario of Westinghouse and GE, that are looking at game theory in order to do that. Again, there is a really great activity, activity 3-17, which has some more examples that you can use here on game theory. I think I would highly suggest before the quiz you check it out, because I think you'll find them helpful in terms of just the ones we do in class and some activities there that you're going to do in breakouts, but also the ones that are in this activity, because I think they will help you get the practice of game theory. And there's a number of them out there. The College Board site has them as well. I think you'll find helpful. Again, some other resources here on oligopoly and game theory to check out, and you can check all of those are links in the chapter notes. Here are some key terms if you want to pause in order to look them up in the online textbook or in the hard copy textbook in terms of the vocabulary that we've covered in this chapter. There is a lot there, but there's a lot of duplication in terms of what you see here. So we've talked a lot about that today, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. Applying it to your business, most businesses don't have oligopoly if they're freshly opening, but they may have some market power in their local markets. Probably more monopolistically competitive, but sometimes some market power that is significant and could be more oligopolistic in terms of what we see there. You also may want to pause. Again, the take-home quiz, the answers to the take-home quiz are posted on my MCPS Classroom, but here, if you want to check them out, you'll find that helpful as well. These are from the sample questions. I know we went over these in the last chapter before the test, but there are some questions on here on oligopoly that you might find helpful. You might want to check those out as well. All right, I hope you found this video to be helpful. Go back and take a look at some of those explainers from those other resources that you'll find helpful. There's also a couple here in the chapter notes, an article from CNBC on OPEC and oil output that goes back to that idea of collusion, that idea of driving up prices through production, and some of the meetings that they've had along the way. Again, some review on all of the different types of imperfect competition that we see here. And time and again, you'll see most of oligopoly when it comes to free response question is usually going to be around game theory. That tends to be the most popular one that we see out there. All right, I hope you found this helpful. Have a great week, and again, check out those explainers and other resources, and we will see you in the next chapter on labor and the factor markets.